after beating two men during an arrest last month. Video of the incident was just released, and as one person described it, the officers looked like a pack of wild animals. This occurred while they arrested a 24-year-old who a few minutes earlier had hit an officer with his scooter. The officer sustained minor injuries, but after catching and handcuffing the suspect, his fellow officers piled on, with one officer repeatedly kicking him in the head. A second person, who was filming the police brutality on a cell phone, was attacked and beaten as well. I asked Miami Beach Mayor Dan Gelber about this incident, and here's what he told me.
The videos, were looked at immediately, and the command staff of our police department realized that they were obviously very problematic. They showed unacceptable and frankly shocking conduct. And so immediately our chief relieved the officers of duty. I don't think this is what our department is. I think we train better than this. I think our officers perform better than this, but obviously this episode was something that is unacceptable, and I think what we did was right.
I guess the part that troubles me is we're celebrating that this case was immediately referred to the state attorney's office and that the police chief took immediate action, as if seeing firsthand and seeing clear evidence of a crime being committed and being reported to the state attorney's office is somehow extraordinary conduct on the part of the police chief and the police department, as opposed to just the norm that should be occurring.
Well, by the way, nobody is celebrating this. I mean, I know some people have commended our department for doing it, but I don't. I think it simply reflects the fact that that's what a department should do. I think this was a very bad incident, but I think the department has responded so far correctly, and there's more to do, by the way, a lot more to do. But I have a lot of faith in our police chief and our department, and my expectation is they will prove me right.
I also spoke to Reuben Roberts, the former head of the NAACP in Miami-Dade County, and Lyle Muhammad, executive director for the Circle of Brotherhood, for their reaction to the video.
I was appalled. I definitely was. I was angry. I was appalled, and my feeling was yet again. We had a year of protests against police brutality last year in combination with the pandemic, and we had several legislation acts out to address this issue and a call for police reform. And we still are dealing with this. This is 2021, and we're still dealing with these issues today.
Well, the initial reaction in seeing the video is being re-traumatized. What a lot of individuals don't understand about this whole brutality, racism, this culture that is in policing and really every vestige of society, you relive those things if you've been through it. So you feel just it goes deeper than empathy for the victim. There were 10,000 training glitches when you look at that video. But the most important thing is we think that these are isolated incidences, but there is a culture in policing that must be eradicated.
Reuben, I want to come back to you. You talk about, a summer of protests to try to bring about certain reforms. Could you not see it as something positive? The fact that the police chief in Miami Beach immediately relieved the officers of duty. In other words, took their badge and their gun away and reported it immediately to the state attorney's office for review, and that criminal charges were filed within a week. Is that not a positive step?
It is a glimmer of positivity in terms of the chief responding in the way that he did. However, when the charges that are being filed are misdemeanor, that means that those officers can come back to their job, or even if they're relieved of duty and they're fired, they can go to another police department. They'll still have their law license. And so that's the issue. It should be a mandatory policy. If you want to go a step further, make it a mandatory policy that any police officer that goes above and beyond duty in an aggressive and a violent manner should be fired, terminated, and there should be a recommendation made to the Department of Law Enforcement for their law license to be revoked. You can't protect and serve a community that you abuse.
Well, I've heard the argument that I just made a second ago, which is that there is something positive to be said here about the police chief having immediately reported this to the state attorney's office. The counter to that is that, why are we giving so much credit to the police department for doing what is essentially the right thing? Well, I'll pick up on that thought.
Well, number one, we should give them credit for doing the right thing. We should get anybody on this planet who's doing the right thing, we should give them credit. Let's just be clear about that. But in reality, the reason why it's being applauded is because it's out of the norm. Going back to police culture. In normal police and prosecutive culture, things don't happen this quickly. And so it is a help and a step, as Ruben said, in the right direction. But we don't want to develop a slave master slave mentality. And what do I mean by that? There's a double standard here. Let's just be crystal clear. I know that the police chief did everything in his power and authority. I know also the state's attorney's office did everything that they thought they could actually win. Being misunderstood, if I or many others would kick in the head an incapacitated, handcuffed police officer, we wouldn't be suspended home with pay. There will never be proper relationships and respect and trust between citizens and police when there's a double standard that you can not only abuse me, but to kick me in my head and I be charged with a misdemeanor. Something should be said about that.
Ruben, we're talking about the charges against the 5 officers, but if you look at that video, there's another 15, 16, 17 officers that are present, that are standing around. I didn't see a lot of people, a lot of those officers trying to intervene and stop these beatings from occurring. What do we make of that?
Well, when you're complicit, you give consent. And what you see there is that those officers who felt emboldened to act in that manner knew that they had support. Brother Lau just said the Circle of Brotherhood works with law enforcement. My company, RER Consulting, we work with with different municipalities in South Florida. We do team talk things to build the relationship in the community between Black folks and law enforcement officers. But it's a difficult task for us when these incidents keep happening.
So just last week, we had 25 high school teenagers from Liberty City and Overtown in a training session with 17 of Miami City's command staff officers. And what we had to go through just to get our young people to feel confident and comfortable in that environment is something that only skilled persons at dealing with trauma can do. Our young people are traumatized, man.
Ruben, you raised this issue, and I thought it was really interesting. So expand on it a little bit, the notion of how this undermines the effort to build trust with young people in the African-American community.
So one of the first questions I asked during my teen talk dialogue sessions between the officers and the youth, and I do them all over Bay County, is how many of you trust police? At the beginning of the session, no one raises their hand. By the end of the session, you have a couple that will raise their hand and say, I trust the officer that I spoke with. Most of these officers don't have any interaction with these young Black and brown kids unless it's precipitated by some sort of call. So they don't go in and, that officer friendly thing is not happening like it used to, that whatever. So they don't go in. These kids, a lot of times, their first encounter with law enforcement is seeing a relative being arrested or brutalized or that sort of thing. So there's a mistrust of that system. And the only way that you're going to get trust of the system is that if you treat these kids like human, if you see the humanity, the people like human. I trained Miami Beach Police a couple of years back. And there were some officers on staff, and I asked the question, what's your job? What's your responsibility? I said, is it to protect and serve? You know what they said? Some of them, not all of them. We're here to get the bad guys. I've said this to you before. Everything looks like a nail to a hammer. So if we are perceived to be the bad guys simply because of the color of our skin, then we are automatically guilty. You follow me? And that's one of the things that the youth who I'm working to build, that's the way that they see that the police will always see them as guilty.
Ruben, do you have any concerns about the way the 5 officers who were arrested, how they were handled? I mean, they were given notice to appear. They were not taken to jail. There were no mug shots. They were never placed in handcuffs. They were simply given essentially tickets and told to appear in court at a later date.
What it does is just really it validates this two-tier system, if you will. You know, that we know that they get professional courtesies, if you will. They're not treated the same. They're protected by laws, the Police Bill of Rights. And so, yes, again, what it does is it does, like Brother Lyle is saying, it dehumanizes. It makes you feel that you're separate and apart, that you're different, and that your value or your worth is not the same.
And then my last point on it is this: what our youth needed to see, not with these officers being sneaked behind in a dark hour in time, booked behind closed doors. They needed to see these officers with mugshots. They needed to see these officers in handcuffs being treated properly as a so-called human being that completely dehumanized other human beings that look just like me. That makes you feel like some sense of worth or justice.
We'll be right back.